Hi, my name is Kerry Critchlow from RCR Recording Studios, and today we're going to be talking about how to actually write a song. Now, songs can be simple or complicated. There's no real wrong or right way to go about it. The only real requirement in order to actually write a song is actually the melody, which I have here listed as our number 2 step, but your average song that you might hear on like a Spotify playlist or whatever, a streaming service, is generally speaking going to have some sort of a lyric, which are just words and phrases used to tell a story or convey a thought, idea, or emotion. They're going to have a melody, which is notes and rhythms sequenced together and arranged to support the lyrics and express an emotion, or if you don't have the lyrics, just, express the emotion. And then you also, as optional as well, have an accompaniment, which can be various instruments playing chords, harmonies, and various rhythms used to support or enhance the melody and or emotional tone of whatever song you're trying to write. And today we're going to be using a very, very basic example, and that example is going to be Mary Had a Little Lamb. Now, the lyrics here are just kind of expressing a story about Mary who had a lamb and whose fleece was white as snow. It's a very simple melody, and the lyrics are very simple. I mean, it was probably written for children, right? And so you have the rhythmics, kind of thing. Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb. Mary had a little lamb whose fleece was white as snow. And then we can take that and we can start adding notes to it. And if we look at our music theory, you might be familiar with this. If you are, I've added just one extra line, which is the solfege. Now, I've personally never really been found much use for solfege, but it occurred to me that some people do get some use out of it, and so I've decided to add it into our music theory. But you can kind of think of it as replacing the solfege, the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Do is a stand-in this case for C, if you're in the key of C. If you're in a different key, do would stand for something else, kind of like these Roman numerals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do are stand-ins for musical notes, depending on what scale you're using. So in the key of C, do is a stand-in for C, re is a stand-in for D, mi is a stand-in for E, fa for F, so for G, la for A, T for B, and then back to do again. And if you're familiar with The Sound of Music, which is a musical that came out in like the 60s or 70s, I believe, there's a song in there called... I don't even know what it's called, but it's like doe, a deer, a female deer. Anyways, if you want to watch that movie or a clip of it on YouTube or whatever to familiarize yourself with this, you can. There's also tons of music YouTube videos out there kind of explaining what solfege is. But the way I kind of, you might find it useful today for these purposes is you can replace any of these words, the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. You can replace any of these with a word or a syllable from a word. So, for instance, instead of do, re, mi, it would be, or I guess in this case would be mi, re, do, Mary had. So instead of mi, re, do as the notes for Mary had, you would do mi, re, do, or Mary had, right? EDC or mi, re, do. And you're just replacing these with the syllables or words from whatever you have. I'm bringing that up to say in the key of C, the notes for Mary Had a Little Lamb are Mary had a little lamb. So E, D, C, D, E, E, E. Depending on what key you're in, right? You could put this in whatever key you wanted, whatever's easiest to sing it in. So hopefully this is making sense. So you're going to come up with a melody or some lyrics. You can, and there's no real right or way or a right or wrong way to do this. It's just whichever way works for you. Some people find it very helpful to write out a melody and then fit words to that melody. Some people find it helpful to write out the words first and then fit those words to a melody. There's no right or wrong way. Whichever way works, whichever helps you finish your song is the way that you ought to do it. Try both ways and see what comes of it. Some people need to do the chords first, and then those chords will help put together the melody, and then that melody will lead you to the words. Again, there's no wrong or right way to do it. Just find the way that works best for you. Play around, experiment, find out which seems the easiest for you, and go with that. Right? There's no right or wrong. Just go ahead and do it. Don't worry too much about the order of things or how it ought to be done. The way it ought to be done is the way that you can do it. So anyways, you're going to want to find your lyrics, your melody, and your accompaniment, or your chords, your harmonies, your rhythms, the things used to support and enhance the melody, etc. And you're going to want to put those all together into a song. In this case, we're going to use Mary Had a Little Lamb as an example. And instead of saying Mary Had a Little Lamb, we're just going to go to John is going to the bank. It's using the same amount of syllables and the same, and we can put the same melody to it, and it will work. But it's just another example of kind of telling a story here, right? You can use songs that kind of already exist, put your own twist to them if you want, and then you can play with the melody later to get away from the copyright stuff. But Mary Had a Little Lamb is not copyrightable. It's public domain, so that's one of the reasons we're using it. But you can kind of. I wanted to use this basic example to show you that you can sort of borrow from what already exists to help you kind of figure out what you ought to do, right? And you can do this with any song you want. Just be careful that you don't copy it too closely. Otherwise, you may be in some legal troubles that, you have been warned. And so you can create this melody. John is going to the bank, to the bank, to the bank. John is going to the bank to get some money out. And so we're using the same melody here and just replacing the words. You can, replace the melody as well. So instead of, doing John is going to the bank, you could do something like John is going to the bank. Like there's no rules here, right? You can make it unique. You can make it your own. And then you can also change up the rhythms. So instead of John is going to the bank, you could do John is going to the bank. To the bank. To the bank. John is going to the bank to get some money out. Right? So like play with the rhythms, play with the notes, play with various things. There's no right or wrong way to do it. And I've come up with some examples as well for accompaniment and how it can change the emotional core of your song, and why it's important that you may want to think about adding these kind of chords, harmonies, and other things, because it can really change up the emotional core of your song. So anyways, I'm going to play the Mary Had a Little Lamb melody here for you. The first half is what I would think of as a little bit more of a standard type of kind of accompaniment for it. It's very major, very happy, very friendly. And then the second half gets a little bit more into like a minor sort of feel and is a little bit more just a different feel and vibe, but the melody is staying the same. And we can kind of look at what's going on here, right? So we have E, D, C, D, E, 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 D, 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 E, G, G, E, D, C, D, E, 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 D, D, E, D, C. And those are the notes that were being played, right? And so we're just going to focus on the melody here first, so you can kind of see what's going on and how it's the exact same both ways. And then we'll dig into what the chords are actually doing. Okay, so you can hear the second half was different than the first half from like the chords and the accompaniment, but the notes were all the same, and it gave it a completely kind of different vibe, right? So for the first half, we have pretty simple. We have a C chord, so the notes are C, E, and G all played on top of each other, and then we have a G, which is a G, B, and D notes all played on top of each other. Again, you can refer to our cheat sheet here to figure out what notes go in the chords. Just whatever note you start on, you're going to skip one, and then you have the third, skip another, and you have the fifth. So C, E, and G. For our G chord, start on the G, skip one, you have our third, which is a B, skip one, you have our fifth, which is the D. So G, B, and D are the notes that belong in the chord of G. And you can do this with any of the chords to figure out what notes belong in there using this sheet here. Highly recommend you write this down, copy it down. It doesn't have to be in like an Excel or whatever, but like I think it will be helpful to have this kind of stuff in front of you, especially if you're a novice and and don't really have a firm grasp of how all of this stuff relates to each other. This will be very helpful for you. Anyways, getting back to an example, we have a C, a G, and then back to a C. So it's C, G, C. And then here we have a G, and then back to a C. And then we start over. It's the same thing again, C, G, C. And then here we have a G into a B diminished. And here the B diminished works. I know we've talked about diminished chords in the past and how they're not very beginner friendly, but what they are really great at doing, if you know how to use them well, is to lead into your one chord. So this is the diminished chord, B diminished. It's B, D, and F. And it does a great job of leading into the one chord, which is our C. And if we go back to our example here, see our diminished here, it comes right before our one chord, or our eight chord in this case, but the one chord, it's going to lead back to that C major because the F wants to pull down to the E and resolve that, and then the B wants to resolve into the C, right? So like they're kind of pulling at those tonal centers to get back to the C chord, and then the D would be could be it's not really relevant so much in this, but the B and the F both want to be pulled to their respective half steps. So the B wants to go up a half step, and the F wants to come down a half step, and it's kind of pulling towards that tonal center of the one chord. So we'll play that one more time for you. Right. And so that's a common place where you're going to use a diminished chord, is to lead into the one chord and bring it back to your tonal home, if that makes sense. There's other use cases for it, but like I said, you just want to be careful when you're using diminished chords because on their own they can be odd, for lack of a better word. But getting into our second half of the song, we are... I don't know why that's not full, but anyways, we have an A minor. So instead of starting on the C, which is this kind of happy thing, the second half, we go into more of a minor tonality because we're starting on an A minor instead of a C. And there's only one note difference between an A minor and a C. A C has a C, an E, and a G. A minor has a C, an E, and an A, or A, C, E. And that one note difference is making a big difference, but because our starting note here is an E, and it also has a C in this phrase here, because it's sharing two notes in common with the C, major chord, we can use an A minor chord here and to replace it and still kind of and change up the vibe altogether. And then on the second chord here, I've chosen to use an E major. All three notes are an E, and so an E major could make sense. Now, because we're in the key of C, even when we switched here, it's still in the key of C. We're starting on the sixth chord here instead of the one chord. This E major, this G sharp, is not in the key of C major. I've used I guess an accidental, if you will, or instead of using the minor third, I'm using a major third. And so instead of this E minor, I'm using an E major. There are reasons for why that works, but you could use an E minor as well. I just thought the E major kind of had a better vibe here for what I was going for. But I knew it would work because all three notes here are an E note, right? And an E chord is definitely going to have an E in it. And so that's why I chose to use that E major. But it kind of gives it that sort of a vibe that I thought was kind of fun. And then the second chord is an F, which I guess technically is a little odd over these D notes here, using the F. But again, I just kind of thought it worked as a vibe. And I guess you could kind of almost think of this F as like a D major or D minor 7 chord, with the D being in the melody. The notes in a D minor chord are D, F, and A. The notes in an F major chord are F, A, and C. So the only real difference between the D minor and the F chord is whether or not you have this C, or whether or not you have a C or a D, right? And so with an F, I don't know. I just thought it was kind of, I thought it worked. You can oftentimes replace the 2 and the 4 chord with one another. So here's your D minor as your 2 chord, and your 4 chord is an F. These are sometimes can be used to replace one another, or switch, swap one out for the other. And in this case, I just decided to go with that. I could have also used the D minor here, and I can kind of actually show you what that would sound like. We're just going to take this C and move it to the D, and now we have a D minor chord. So this is what that would sound like. And then this is just a C that's walking down the bass note to a B. So it's just a C major chord, and then you have a B over your C major chord, which I guess technically you can make it it makes it a C major 7. But it's just kind of using it as a walk from a C to a B, which leads us back into an A. So it's kind of a walk, C, B, A, which is bringing us back to our starting chord, which is that A minor. And then over here we have what's called a 2-5-1 turnaround, if you will. And that is basically, you can lead into your 1 chord by using the 2 and the 5 from whatever key you're in. In this case, it would be a D minor and then a G. And so I decided to use the 2-5-1 turnaround, the 2, the 5 to the 1. So it's a D minor to a G, which leads into a C. And you can do this in any key, and it's very, very common. You'll hear this all the time in music, where you're using the 2 to the 5 to lead to the back into your 1 chord, or your home chord, your end chord. So D minor, G, C. Hopefully this is making sense, and you're getting kind of an understanding of why, it's helpful to know some rudimentary theory, although you don't need to know this at all in order to write music, but it can be helpful, especially if you don't know kind of what you're doing. This is a great place to start, right? And this is kind of your basic theory stuff. But when it comes to songwriting, just remember you want to use words and phrases that are used, words and phrases are used to tell a story or convey a thought, idea, or emotion. Sometimes you can think of this as poetry or things like that. Oftentimes you'll hear that they'll use various rhyme schemes. You don't have to, but it's common to use rhyming schemes. And maybe we'll go through this kind of stuff. A deeper dive into lyrics in another video. But for today, just kind of the takeaway is just kind of think about what it is, the story you want to tell, or the thought or idea or emotion you want to convey to your listener, and use the words and phrases that will kind of push that story or thought or idea or emotion as best as you can, right? And then you can use those words and phrases and put notes to them and rhythms to them in order to kind of paint, again, keep that emotional expression going, and then to add even more emotion to your lyrics and melody. You can use different chords, harmonies, rhythms, etc., to kind of support your emotional tone, support the melody, support what you're kind of trying to do. And the choices you make can impact kind of the overall vibe of the song, whether you want it to stay kind of more happy, or if you want to give it this more kind of like melancholy vibe, sad vibe, whatever you want to call it. We'll play it one more time from top to finish, but the first half you're going to feel has like a bright and bubbly feel, which is like a more standard Mary Had a Little Lamb. And then the second half is going to have that more melancholy, kind of wistful sort of feel to it. Right. And so I've tried to kind of cover a lot of bases here with this example. And so this is going to be a lot more broad, and we're not really getting into any of the details per se about how this is all kind of coming together. But I wanted to give you sort of like the broad 30,000 foot view of how you would actually go about writing a song, right? You pick some words, phrases, and whatever is going to help you convey your thought, idea, emotion, or the story you want to tell. You're going to put those to a melody, or you take a melody and you put words to the melody, whichever is easier, whichever is better, whichever works for you is the way you ought to do that. And the melody is just going to be, like I said, a sequence of notes and rhythms put together and arranged, and ideally they're going to support the lyrics and express the emotional feel that you want to convey. And you can use different rhythms here. You can see with this Mary Had a Little Lamb example, it's mostly quarter notes and like dotted halves or dotted quarter notes and things like that. It's a very simple melody. You can play around with a lot of this, right? You can give it, I don't know if it'll sound super great, but you can kind of move things over, slide them over, and give it a completely different feel. Right, kind of feels a little choppy doing it that way, but there might be a better way to do it. So feel free to play around with these various rhythmic elements, move them to where they feel appropriate, where they're going to be vibing for you, where it feels good, etc. You can play with the rhythm, you can play with the durations. There's lots of leeway here, even with this simple melody. And you can even do different notes if you want, depending on what you're trying to do. Right. So, like I said, there's no wrong or right way to kind of go about it. Just you can start with something that's familiar and kind of just play with some of the rhythm and the notes and move them to different sequences and stuff like that. Or you can just kind of hear something in your head and try and, put it down to paper. You can also use the melody to inform your chord choices. So you can kind of see, well, what are the notes here that are in this melody? And then you can find chords that kind of have some of those notes within them and use those chords to help support that melody. Or you can do the chords first and then put the melody over those chords, using the notes that, are in those chords. And here you go. Like, for instance, if you want to write a melody over a C major chord, which is a C, an E, and a G, well, technically any of the notes are going to work in the key of C, but a C, an E, and a G are going to be the strongest notes that you can play over a C major chord because those are the notes that are in that chord. You can use passing notes like the D, the F, and the A, and the B as well to kind of help kind of support or give runs or like various things. There's no wrong or right way to do it, but you can kind of think of it as if you're playing a D minor, which is a D, an F, and an A, well, the D, F, and A are going to be the strongest chord or strongest notes that you can play over that D minor. They're going to be the most resonant because they already belong in there. But you can add in some of the other notes, the E, the G, the B, the C, in order to kind of color your melody and give it some more interest and things like that. Another thing that you might want to notice, about some of these are interval skips. So you have a lot of consecutive kind of up and down C, D, or E, D, C, D, E, right? It's all three like these notes kind of going down and then back up. But then here we have a skip up to this G. There's no F in between, right? So it just kind of skips. So playing with interval jumps can also be helpful, but knowing that, doing small interval changes will work, especially for simpler melodies. But don't be afraid to do interval jumps, right? Going from one note to, a few notes above instead of the one right next to it. So like you have E, D, C, D, E as our beginning, but if you wanted to, you could do an E, D, G, D, or something along those lines, right? So you can skip a few notes and go all the way over here and then kind of come back down. Or you can do like, a step at a time here, right? From one note to the next note to the next. You can play around with that kind of stuff, the intervals you're using. Anyways, and then, you can choose the chords and harmonies and rhythms and things that you think best support your song, whether that's kind of giving things the major feel like we did with the first half of the song, or the sadder, kind of more wistful, melancholy feel that we have for the second half of the song. Even though the melody is exactly the same, the chords underneath it really change up the vibe of the song and give it a whole kind of different feel. Over here, Mary's pretty happy. Over here, Mary's a little sadder, right? And so you can use that to convey kind of the emotional, excuse me, the emotional themes or vibes or tones that you want to convey, and make your song kind of seem happier or sadder or, you know, more joyous, more wistful, like whatever emotional core you're going for. You know, and one point, like I said, Mary Had a Little Lamb is happy in the first half, and Mary Had a Little Lamb is kind of Mary's a little sadder in the second half, and so you can use that to your advantage. So yeah, hopefully this has all been helpful. Like I said, I may do a deeper dive on each of these elements. Like I said, today was more about kind of broad strokes and just kind of giving you the barest overview of what it would take to create a song, and you know, go from there. But yeah, I hope this has been helpful. I hope you guys have yourselves a wonderful day, a wonderful week, and I will talk to you later. Bye bye.